Rhineland, India. Uh, I am part of company since almost 10 years now. The group is more than 150 years old now. Uh, uh, this is part of the TIC group, which is termed as testing, inspection, consulting, and certification. And I am part of their renewable energy group. When I say renewable energy, it's across vertical from wind to solar to wind solar hybrid, and then hydrogen is the latest one. I'm proud to say that we have our own standard, which is as per RFNBO, and we have been certifying quite a few projects now, not only in India but across globe. So I'm representing India, Middle East, Africa region for this. For the Rhineland, and in India we have already certified couple of projects. Couple of projects are ongoing, and uh, all of these projects are currently not for pure green hydrogen, but for the derivatives, green ammonia. So that's very much in brief, and we are involved not only in certification side of business, but also consulting side of green hydrogen business. So we have completed couple of feasibility projects also for green hydrogen.
Thanks, Rupesh. Timo, I know they missed out one part in the introduction, that you're also a steering committee member at CertiHigh. But please.
My name is Timo, and I'm wearing two hats here today. So the first hat is as the founder of H2 Global and the CEO of Hintco, which maybe some of you have heard already. It's and let's say a market ramp-up instrument that we've developed over the last couple of years. We're getting funding from governments. The German government was the first government to pick this up, and we're trying to solve the offtake conundrum and really create hydrogen markets. So we got a lot of experience, really sometimes of difficult experience in the last 3 years when we did the first auctions. How do we deal with standards? How do we deal with certifications? And the second hat that I'm wearing today is also I'm the co-chair of Certify, which is one of the voluntary schemes in Europe. So I can take different perspectives here actually in discussion here today.
Thank you very much. Dr. Sam.
Thanks, Nish. My name's Sam Bartlett. I work for the Green Hydrogen Organization, which is based in Geneva. I go to a lot of conferences, and it's really exciting to be here in India where the focus is almost exclusively on green hydrogen. Usually, if you go to a hydrogen conference around the world, they talk about clean hydrogen or low carbon hydrogen, and they don't define what that means. And that's what we're going to talk about in this session, about what standards and certification and why it's important. And I've been trying to think of a really simple way of explaining why it's important. If you spend lots and lots of money and buy a Rolex, right? In the green box, you get the green box, you get the nice watch, and you get a little certificate. If you lose the box and you lose the certificate, you can still go and take that Rolex to a watch dealer and say, do you want to buy my watch? And they'll be able to test that watch and say it's a Rolex, and you'll get most of your money back again, even if you lose the certificate. That will not work for hydrogen. Let's pretend this is gray ammonia, and this is green ammonia. This one, gray ammonia, costs you $1, and green ammonia costs you $10. You take it to a chemist, they can't tell you the difference. The value is in the certificate. The certificate tells you how it was produced and shows that it was produced with close to zero emissions. That's where the value is. So that's why standards matter. That's why certifications matter. And the last thing I'll say is usually they put these sessions at the end of the day and they have engineers and auditors. It should have more economists and CEOs, and because this is a political discussion. What gets certified? What products get accepted? Which product gets a green premium is a very interesting, fascinating, and political exercise, not just one for the chemists, not just one for the auditors. I have a great deal of respect for chemists and auditors, but this is a politically sensitive issue. So we're going to be talking about how India has defined green hydrogen and where that fits on the global stage.
Don't forget the bankers.
And the bankers, of course, and the watchmakers.
Thanks, Sam. Sonja, please.
All right. Thank you, Sam. So my name is Sonja. I'm with Perspectives, which is a German headquarters research and consultancy company, and we focus on supporting the private sector in generating carbon credits. I could now also say certificates, but probably that would confuse the discussion a bit. So basically what we are doing is we want to support, in the hydrogen context, we want to support companies in using carbon markets to facilitate investments, also helping to make projects more bankable through additional revenues from carbon credits. And this is what we are doing besides, doing research and studies on energy and global climate policies. But this is one of our focuses. And we will start off actually this month, because we recently got the confirmation of support from the German government to develop a green fertilizer methodology under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, and probably also under voluntary carbon markets. So this is what we are going to do. And maybe there are some people from green ammonia production or green fertilizer production in the room that could have an interest.
Yes, thank you. So I'm Abhay Bakre, very recently joined as the head of the mission, the Green Hydrogen Mission, what we are talking since morning. And good to see so much of the huge oversubscribing each and every session, each and every event, the entire event. Thank you so much for supporting this second edition of the international conference. So before that, as I worked in the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, heading the energy efficiency and also the carbon markets. So I just want to add a little bit more. It's not only that the chemist but also suppose the subscribers. So if we can say that this light has got a green electron, the purchaser of this, we can't make out whether this light is coming from a renewable electron or a coal electron. So the purchaser of this electricity, if he has a contract with the renewable developer, then he can say yes. So it's easy to account the electron because it is accounted at the place itself. But when we talk about the green hydrogen, and the hydrogen in itself has no color, that's what we say. But we started giving different colors like gray, blue, etc. So we have defined that. So it's obviously it is necessary if we speak about green hydrogen. It's not only to define it; it has to be certified, it has to be accounted, and also it has to be tracked till it is consumed at the final end. So whether it's a green ammonia or whether it's green methanol, everything has to be accounted, tracked till it is consumed. And that's where the certification scheme is there. And why do they use this green certification? As said very rightly, either to get a carbon credit or to mitigate their emission targets, or maybe to, of course, get some kind of incentives. And for India, when we are launching this, we have launched this mission, and so many incentives have been announced. The only way to release those incentives or to become eligible for those incentives is to first certify whether it is the green hydrogen or not. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. So before we start off, going deeper into these discussions, let's have a look at what the global landscape is. In our first round of discussions, it's already almost 4:30. I was hoping, this would have been done at 4:10, but we're 20 minutes behind. But Sam said a little bit about our organization, the Green Hydrogen Organization. I see some familiar faces, but those of you who don't know us, we are a global foundation that's working to accelerate green hydrogen. And we are present across 5 continents. We have staff in Japan, Korea, in India, Indonesia, Norway, UK, and Geneva. And we were one of the first organizations to launch a voluntary scheme for the certification of green hydrogen. And Sam, in fact, led that. Sonja was part of it, and I think, we have a great panel here because Mr. Bakre was also involved, in his time at BEE, looking at the initial certification for the green hydrogen in India. Over the last 2 years, as GH2, we've tracked this evolving landscape, right? Every month, every 3 months, it's always changing. New things come into light. We haven't tripped and fallen down yet, right? So everything we say, people might not think it's important because we haven't, felt the pain of some of these pitfalls. But we will go deep into all of that. But let's begin with, let's have an overview on what global standards look like, How do they compare to Indian standards? And you might hear the word RFNBO thrown around. For those of you who don't know RFNBO, it's an EU certification scheme that looks at renewable fuels of non-biological origin, right? Just so that you stay in track of what's going on. But let me start, with getting a perspective from Timo, because as you know, Timo is the CEO of H2 Global, and he's been looking at various markets across the world to get for offtakes into Germany, right? So it's more important for him than anyone else in the room to be aware of this evolving landscape. So Timo, if you could give us a little bit of an overview of what the global standards landscape is and how do they differ in their approaches?
I mean, yeah, the issue is a little bit, I would love to be able to give you completely overview what the global standards are, because there is no overview. There's different approaches. Europe takes the RFNBO approach. There's the ISO approach, which is maybe applicable in other parts of Asia, for example. The Americans, they now turned a very interesting move back about the IRA. They're actually on the footprint now of the European approach here. But also when we started H2 Global 3 years ago, when I started the first auction for HIMCO, the so-called delegated acts under the European RED II legislative were not even published. So we had to start a tender asking producers to be compliant with a standard that was not even defined. How the hell do you do that? How do you talk about market ramp up if this is the nascent status where we are in this market? So very challenging. Fortunately, these RFNBO or the delegated acts were defined middle of last year. However, they take a very Eurocentric view in this point. So it was a really interesting debate we had with bidders, also from India, but from all over the world, explaining a EU approach to bidders in Brazil, in India, in Chile, explaining geographic correlation, bidding zone concepts that are only applied in Europe, things like that. Put that into a contractual agreement, because it's one thing having a standard or a regulation out there, which might be very abstract, but you need to put this into a binary agreement, into a contract that is binding for both sides. This is really challenging. So we're really pleased that at least the delegated acts were issued last year. Also, it was interesting in Australia, actually, was one of the players in Australia said, I don't care how high we have to jump, but you just have to tell us where you put the bar here, because otherwise I don't know what to do. And the big issue is here, if you're underscoring that bar, you're running a risk, you're investing billions of dollars, and you don't know if you're in 5 years, 10 years down the line still producing a product that you can get that nice certificate for your Rolex for, because otherwise you will be standing there with a bottle of water and not with green hydrogen or green ammonia. So that is why it's so important that we have a global standard. We see all these different approaches. Also, we got a lot of discussions with players, and with our government, we're just talking about this and that. We say, no, you need to be applied with the RFNBO requirements, and unfortunately, I cannot tell you exactly what they mean. We're interpreting them ourselves. We're trying to find a way to put this into a contractual agreement where there's a lot of uncertainty today, that this contractual agreement allows that you can steer it down the line once we have more clarity. Yesterday, there was a very important step taken in Europe where the voluntary schemes amongst them also certify, where at least the technical assessment were accredited. I mean, we're talking about this now since, I think the delegated acts were always like 2 months away. That was for 3 years. Finally, after 4 years, they were issued. We don't have accredited voluntary schemes in place yet. Hopefully, they will be issued towards the end of this year. Then you can at least go to Bureau Veritas or to others and to other accreditation schemes and say, can you give this mean and in writing with a stamp? This is so important because otherwise you guys are not going to take investments, and that's why you need the bankers on board, because they want to see that stamp. Otherwise, we're getting nowhere.
Thanks, Timo. Before we continue any further, in respect to your time, I just want to ask the audience, are there some terms that Timo used that you're not familiar with, right? Was there anything that was, that something you're not used to in using, in your normal language? Yeah? Okay. So you understand what temporal matching is, geographical correlation. Okay, wonderful. So all of y'all are here because you have interest in the subject. So that's very good. Now, I think Timo's raised quite a lot of important points, but Sam, I want to come to you and ask you, what has been done right? In what is, however things have evolved, and where do you think perceived weaknesses are, and what should be addressed?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the first thing I'd like to say is that hydrogen and ammonia, they're not new industries. There are actually dozens of existing standards that are not particularly contentious. If you want to build a hydrogen pipeline or an ammonia storage facility, or you want to build a fuel cell, there are existing international standards that you can reference. What's new and what's challenging is this discussion about what is the emissions part of it and the sustainability part of it. We'll come back to sustainability later, but let's just focus on the emissions part. There's some work being done. It's very important. There's work being done by was first of all done by the IPHE and now by the ISO. And it's an ISO standard for all the different hydrogen production pathways on how you measure the emissions. It hasn't been released yet. It's still a work in progress. If you're really interested in this emissions measurement, it's really important you follow what's happening with this ISO process. There are some very contentious issues. Are there loopholes? But there's another problem. It's only a measurement tool. It doesn't have a threshold. And for me, it's like saying, we're drowning and we've agreed how we're going to measure how deep the water is. I guess that's useful to know, but what we really need to do is to move into the shallow zone. We need to find out which pathways are going to get us to net zero. So this work at the ISO is very important, but it doesn't set a threshold. So then I'll make two more points. India has set a threshold, 2 kilos.
And they talk about the reducing also at that time, how the regulation are going to be development. Simultaneously, the use of green corridors will be many countries. Also, the Indian side, I appreciate the dialogue. We are understanding all the parameters also, because it's not just industry, but it's being a dialogue for the whole country.
Okay, but let me just finish these last 2 points.
Yeah.
So India has released a definition of green hydrogen with a threshold of 2 kilos. In Brazil, it's 7 kilos.
Yes.
Okay. In Australia, it's 0.6 kilos. In the US, if you want to qualify for the largest subsidy, it's 0.45. Okay. So a lot of differences there. But there's even more to it than that. It's about proving, and you mentioned, it's about taking a renewable electricity. What qualifies as renewable electricity? Because that is rated as 0 emissions. If you're using 100% renewable energy, doesn't matter whether it's 7 kilos, 2 kilos, you're going to be 0. But if you're using a little bit of grid electricity, so really one of the most important questions is, how do we define what qualifies as renewable electricity? Does it need to come from the same market? Does it need to be hourly matched? Can it be annually matched? Does it need to be a new additional renewables, or can it come from an old hydro facility? These are the things that are being debated. The EU has some strict regulations in the RFMBO rules. There's some draft rules in the US, but my goodness, they are very, very contentious. And the Americans, they love their legal exercises. So there's going to be legal challenges, and who knows what the next administration is going to do. Canada has strict rules. Australia has some new rules, but they allow potentially annually matching. So when we're looking at India's rules, that's one of the things that we're looking at very closely.
Offtake agreements are even the buyer will have, I'm sorry, in case if India has this 2 kg threshold that you're saying, but these companies, some of them are signing offtake agreements, and those recipients, certainly those countries will have stricter norms. So in that way, don't you think these things will settle down or normalize?
So you just touched on, and I think this is one of the, we may have time to circle back to this, is that when you're looking at global trade, you need to look at the standard, let's say the standard here in India, but if you're going to export to Europe, and you're going to get support from H2 Global, then you need to meet the European rules. So you've got this fragmentation of standards, fragmentation of certification schemes, and all of this is adding more cost and more complexity. So then I think it sort of gives us a little bit of an introduction into the kind of landscape where we are. There's been an enormous amount of work, you know, because hydrogen technologies are not new, ammonia is not new. So we're kind of standing on the shoulders of that work, but there's some very contentious questions, and it's really going to shape which projects get financing, which projects reach FID, and what products will be accepted in the marketplace. And it's a competition, you know, so different countries have different advantages. So that's why you see India going all in on green, whereas you see Norway going all in on blue because they've got all the gas. So it's fascinating. There's the economics and the politics and the auditing and the engineering.
Well, I think the last few lines you said really, you know, give you a good overview, because we will not have a common standard across the globe for this industry. But we also need to step back. We are all in the industry, so we get deep into this. But look back, it is unprecedented. You know, for an industry that is not even 1% of, you know, the current hydrogen market, we are setting so many rules and we're having so many discussions. And even in India, I don't think for any industry in our history has there been a mission, has there been so much support, right? There's been so much interest from stakeholders like industry, right? Indian project developers are leading a lot of global conversations, but ultimately, you know, on the global scale, there's a lot of interest to protect their own natural resources, geopolitics, etc. So each one has their own, you know, agenda when they define standards and certifications. But for us, we are lucky that India has an abundance of wind and solar. We don't have much natural gas, and we are very clear that we will take the green pathway. So now I want to come to know Mr. Bakre. So you've been, you know, you've been involved in this conversation for quite some time, right? And you've seen the global developments as well, and you've recently put out something for stakeholder consultation. What do you think India has focused on, right, in terms of its natural advantages and its, you know, its geopolitical issues, but also in terms of where our targeted markets are, and what have we done to complement those markets and trade from India for green hydrogen and derivatives?
Yeah, thank you. So I start with very simple thing that today's conference is actually for the green hydrogen. And as you say rightly, because we have huge success stories for solar and the wind development in the past decade or so, as you already seen in the morning. So the mission was launched as green hydrogen. So the entire strategy moves around the green hydrogen. And the one step further is that it is defined what is green hydrogen. That's the 2 kg per kilogram of hydrogen per. That's the GHG emission. Now, what does this mean? If it is entirely renewable energy, it could be as close as very zero, and definitely it qualifies as green. If it is 1.0, that means a little bit of grid electricity. It is still below 2, it's qualified as green. Even if it is 1.8, 1.9, 1.95, it is still qualified as green. But if it's 2.1, 2.2, 2.5, it's not going to be the green. That's the decision the Indian strategy has been made, considering the entire thing. Now, as per current grid emission factor, which is now we talk about 0.71, 0.72, about 96 to 94% of electricity has to come from renewable. So that means only 4 to 6% can come from grid. And then perhaps you can achieve the threshold of 1.8, 1.9. The second question, as you rightly said, the market. The markets, if we talk about the green ammonia market, something in the Singapore or Japan, that's what our developers are aiming for, or some of the markets on green hydrogen itself, or maybe green ammonia and fertilizer, as we are talking now. Fertilizer is part of the ETS scheme, or the emission and the Fit for 55 and all Delegation Act. So if the EU prescribes that as a 3.4 or 3.3 at whatever, or if it is further modified to whatever level, now that's basically from well to what you call grave. Whereas Indian 2 kg per kg of hydrogen emission is actually defined from well to the gate. Now, that means there is a lever, say, for EU. As of now, it's about 1.4. So the developer can decide, because suppose they want to transport green hydrogen from India to Europe or say Rotterdam for some reason. They have to take it to the port, Indian port, then take it through the ships, then again convert from that ammonia to green hydrogen, the fraction. So all these things, if there is always a possibility of further addition on the GHG emission. So all these markets, if they are defining, obviously the purchaser will define the country where the purchaser is situated. They will define their own standard or their thresholds. And the developer then can decide whether they are able to meet, because they have to meet that, otherwise they can't get finance from bank, they can't get the purchase order. But all these things has to be certified through accredited verifier. And that's what we are trying to put. So we consulted in the industry. As you know, already the Indian carbon market is evolving. We need a carbon verification. As you rightly said, the original GHG emission, one has 14064, and what you talk about the, I think 19870 is something that the draft has been put up for the green hydrogen. So all this certification will actually facilitate evolvement all this market, the development of a good framework where it is acceptable within the country or all other countries where the trade is going to happen. So this is very essential. In my opinion, the certification scheme which we have put out on for public comments is basically to facilitate and actually to all the developers to further scale up the green hydrogen production. And of course, the verifier like Veritas and other agencies are already there who can verify. Actually, these kind of certification schemes have to be accepted at par in different countries. Then only the hydrogen trade will be much easier without many complications, and that can evolve the market. Thank you.
Sonja, in all of this, how important are these definitions, for some of the work that you do in the carbon markets, right? Because these carbon markets and the credits that are going to be generated from green hydrogen and ammonia are going to play a crucial role in the next decade or so for the project developers. So, in the last, and if you have any comments from remarks Abhay shared, please.
Definitely, thank you. And I think it's really important to differentiate those two different systems. The one hand or one side would be national requirements, be it in India or be it in Europe or wherever, where governments define what carbon intensity threshold are eligible to be counted as green or RFNBO or however you want to call it. And this is a stringent threshold approach. And then you can still think, okay, what kind of emissions are included? Is it only electricity and electrolyzer, or does it also include upstream emissions or whatever you have? And this is different from the carbon markets, because in the carbon markets, you basically compare which kind of fuels you have used so far and what then is the carbon intensity of the hydrogen you use. And you can, for example, replace coal with blue hydrogen, and you may still be able to generate some carbon credits. Obviously, if you replace coal with 100% green hydrogen, the difference between what we call baseline emissions and project emissions is higher. So if you use green instead of blue hydrogen, you get more carbon credits and then, of course, higher revenues. So to come back to your question, how does all the certification work correlate to the carbon credit issues? Obviously, also when you want to generate carbon credits, you need to monitor the emissions that are related to your hydrogen production. And this is then simply, well, very similar, if not the same approaches as are being discussed under ISO, under RED 2, and also under the Indian standards. So that's basically the foundation. But then the output of that work is used slightly different instead of either applying or either responding or not responding to a fixed threshold.
Well, thanks very much. Now, maybe to our two assurance providers or creditors, right? So you've been in the industry, you've been tracking global changes, I want you guys to come in and to comment on what India has done right from in your perspective, And, and where do you think, you feel you have suggestions, or you think things need to be tweaked?
Yeah. So first of all, congratulations, India, for coming out with, the draft detailed scheme for certifying projects. To our view, this scheme primarily cater to the domestic consumption of hydrogen. And then, of course, likewise, you mentioned, and other fellow colleagues mentioned that when it comes to the export of hydrogen, then the country wherein the export is happening, the standard of the same country should be followed. For example, RFNBO or US or Japan. So that's the baseline. In terms of Indian standard, so apart from RFNBO, renewable energy based, uh, only renewable energy based fuel hydrogen, they have also considered uh, biogas and biomass based fuel to be considered as, apart from electrolysis process. So that is an add-on, uh, which will definitely promote generation of hydrogen from biomass based. And then Indian scheme has also uh, shown the process of certification in 4 different stages, from pre-certification till monitoring of the till the monitoring of produced hydrogen. So it gives flexibility to the generators, to the consumers, and of course there is a clause which I saw in our standard scheme, is which even penalizes on mixing green hydrogen with gray hydrogen. So that's my remark on
Well,
this.
that's first of a kind. I
Yeah,
think
that's first of a kind.
congratulations.
Yeah.
I think that this is one of
Want to
the
add
other
something?
ways, to ensure that we do this sustainably, right? Going back to one of my comments I made earlier, that this is all unprecedented for an industry, to have all of these r- regulations and all of these requirements before you start off. But why are we doing this? That's the question we need to ask and revisit. Why are we trying to promote a product that is three times the price of what's available in the market? And it's because of climate change, right? And this is the very reason we have all of these requirements. But Pulak, you're an international organization as well, and you have colleagues working with several other schemes. What has India done right? And what do you think there are perceived weaknesses within the Indian scheme of things?
So I think, first of all, we should congratulate the MNRE team for coming out with a draft guideline. I still remember the last ICGH that we came here, and we all went back and not being sure about how the certification would work, because we still didn't have a threshold. I think right after the ICGH 2023, we did get a threshold for 2 kilograms of CO2 equivalent, but we really didn't have a framework. And then with the complexity about every region bring about a regulation, I think this is definitely was quite confusing for many project developers here in India. I think the new draft guideline that we have seen coming from MNRE, I think we ran it through our global teams, and the feedback that we have got is that they really live up to an international specification and framework. I think from that perspective, we should thank MNRE for bringing out a really rigorous framework. For sure, there are few items here and there, but on a broad scale, it does represent most of the international schemes that are currently running. On top of it, the Indian scheme, as Rupesh rightly said, brings in a penalty clause, which is to some extent commendable from an Indian perspective, because many of the international schemes leave you with the market dynamics to determine this. But we have kind of decided to bring in a serious penalty clause about possibly mixing the gray and the green ones. Okay. The good part that we should appreciate now that the 2 kilograms of CO2 equivalent threshold that has been given now has a very clear framework methodology on how it would get measured, so that there is much more clarity about it. Because the 2 kilograms of CO2 equivalent makes no sense if in case it doesn't tie up with a boundary, with a framework, with a methodology. And from that perspective, I think the guideline that has come out from MNRE on the draft certification looks quite good. Okay, there are 1 or 2 items, because even the ISO 19870, which is evolving, which was kind of released in COP28 last year, does have 1 or 2 differences, and I think those would be something we would prefer to bring it up for consultation with MNRE team. But overall, the scheme looks quite interesting, quite rigorous, and quite as per the international standards.
Thanks, Pulak. I think we should have a round of applause for, what the government has done, in enabling this industry. Yes, we'll take your question.
However, there are some area of improvement which we have found. One is the social impact, environmental impact, and
Okay, I think it's a little premature.
Yeah, health and safety related.
No. Thank you very much. And what was your name, sir?
Manoj Kumar
Manoj.
Borekar.
Okay.
Yeah.
Manoj, thank you very much. That's part of the agenda. We have 25 minutes, and Mission Director just told me we can even stretch it a little bit longer. So we will get to that topic. It's very dear to several panelists here and our organizations. Thank you. I want to move to Sam again. Sam. Securing financing, right? And certifications. How are they linked? Why are they important?
They're absolutely crucial, especially if you want to secure that green premium. You have to convince your customer that you have a certificate credit that can be trusted. So that means that you need, I like sort of my metaphors. I'm not sure if this one works, but let me try it on you kind of thing. You need to have, like when you're running a business, you first need to have your accounts, and then you have your auditor. If you have a good set of accounts, your audit goes really, really quickly because it's really simple. An audit just says, can I trust that this financial statement is an accurate account of the financial health of this organization? It's the same in hydrogen kind of thing. If you're building a green hydrogen or a green ammonia production facility, you need that carbon accounting system. Basically, you need to prove that you know where your electricity is coming from. Is it coming from hydro? Is it coming from solar, from wind? And if you're going to export to Europe, and essentially for every hour of production, you need to trace back your electricity use to a renewable source. So you need that. It's like an energy information system. You need the accounts. Then you can come to our friends, the auditors, and they will go through the books and they'll say, can we trust this? If we can trust it, then we'll issue the certificate. You've got a certificate, then you have a product that you can take and you can secure that green premium. So again, it's the certificate that carries so much of the value because the commodity itself is indistinguishable from the gray product that's already available in the market. The challenge, and any developer in the audience will know this challenge, is that you can't get the certification until you build, until you can have the auditor come in and kick the tires, right? And see that everything works. But you can't build until you can go to your bank, until you can go to your customer. So you need the certificate to build. You can't get the certificate until you built it. So we often talk about this chicken and the egg problem. This is one more thing that the Indian government has done that I haven't seen anybody else do, is that you've got sort of two phases of certification. You've got this kind of, so that the developer can come in at an early stage, at the pre-feasibility stage and say, here's my power purchase agreements. If I'm using my own renewables, then you can secure this, and maybe you can talk some more about this, but you can secure this sort of pre-certification. And then once you've built it, then you can come and get your auditor to come and issue the certificate. That's very smart because it helps to de-risk the project. It means you can access cheaper capital and therefore offer better terms in your offtake agreement. The last thing I'll say is that the offtake agreement is key because it's the contract that says, I'm going to supply hydrogen, I'm going to supply ammonia, I'm going to supply methanol. It's going to be at this purity and it's going to be at this pressure, but it's also going to come with this. As part of the contract, the offtake agreement will specify the product must come with an independently verified certification of its carbon footprint following this methodology. So again, certification is not kind of an optional extra. It's integral to the product that we're selling.
Mr. Bakre, if you have some comments on pre-qualification and why you included this, because we've out of necessity had to look at pre-qualification, right, in other markets. But what made you, come out with this?
So very rightly said. In fact, when I wrote this scheme in February, personally, and it came out as a second step because we wrote the carbon market for us. So we wanted to actually align our entire approach, not disturbing the industry's overall understanding. At that time, we had kept only one certification, which was, of course, once the facility has been set up and there is a production of hydrogen, we thought of keeping it since the 2 kg is defined as an annual average. So it was first thing how the developer is going to store a green hydrogen or green ammonia for a year and wait for the certificate till the end. So we thought of then giving a monthly certificate as a temporary basis. But if we audit every month, the cost is going to be very high. But then the question came at what about the facility? So this is the second stage, which basically happened in the third week of April. There was industry discussion, and then we went back to, as I mentioned, we first wrote the Indian carbon market, and taking a cue of the voluntary carbon market, because the voluntary carbon market, which is distinct from the compliance market. Compliance market, as you rightly said, there's always a baseline, and whatever is achieved over and above the baseline is the differential, is the carbon credit, and that carbon credit can be decided what kind of input fuel can be switched from the coal to blue or gray hydrogen. But in case of voluntary, it is the project which is registered in terms of a methodology, and then post-registration, again, there is an audit to actually claim the credit. So this 2-stage was actually picked up from the voluntary carbon market. And now we have a 2-stage where the facility is planned to be set up. What are the elements of the facility? How the electrolyzer will be set up? How the water will come? Is it a demineralized water? Is it a saline water? How the water is treated? How the water will come? What are the other BOP, balance of plants? Whatever elements are there, and what is their overall design? How are they going to consume different parts of energy? This certification as a facility is also first step which is kept here. Now that will help a lot, as you rightly said, for fetching or perhaps guaranteeing the finance, because unless the facility is set up, you cannot produce the hydrogen, and unless the hydrogen is produced, you cannot certify it's green. So it has a pre-facility and the facility certificate, which will definitely help in further following up exactly the way it is done, more or less in the voluntary carbon market. Thank you.
So the whole pre-qualification, it brings a lot of confidence, not just to the financiers, but also to your customers, but also to your employees and your own organization. On the question, staying with the same theme, I want to bring in Timo. Timo, how, the whole question around pre-qualification, how does it impact, your offtake agreements and contracts? What if in 5 years or in 3 years, governments change regulations or requirements in the certification, right? How do you see this playing out in some of the contracts you're signing up for offtakes?
It's a very important point. I mean, what we also have in our contractual agreement here is now we sign a 10-year offtake agreement irrespectively of changes in the legislation in Europe. Because otherwise, this is something that bankers, that developers cannot deal with uncertainty. And, if, the governments change in Europe, maybe it's even higher standards being applied. This is something you cannot take into consideration today. However, we would like to have the opportunity to renegotiate so that we all are RFNBO compliant, irrespectively what they look like, and then potentially also pay an additional premium for that we will obviously then also get paid for in the markets. But it's a very important point that we create that security today, because it's one thing, you need to get the bankers on board. And the bankers, I'm an ex-banker myself. They do want to see predictable cash flows and absolute certainty, especially in an absolute nascent market that nobody ever entered into. You have to bring that certainty on the table. Otherwise, you won't get your contract, you won't get your banking, you won't get your finance. So this is why we try to provide exactly that certainty.
Let me stay with you here and, take a tangent to the next theme for this conversation, which is today, there are several social issues, environmental issues, that are a hindrance not just to the developer, but to local communities, but also to the equity holders in these projects? As H2 Global and HINCO, how are you addressing, and what steps have you taken to ensure that your projects that you're buying your green hydrogen and green ammonia from are in some way not compliant, but rather they are aware of local issues. They are ensuring that whatever they're doing is done sustainably, and have they assessed impact on land, water, and local community?
It's a very important and also controversial point. I mean, in our agreement here, we have like 3 sets of standards. The first is sort of the technical requirements. The second level is the RFNBO requirements. And then we have an additional layer, environmental and social requirements that are put into the grant agreement that HINCO has received from the government. Water, land use, gender, qualifications, all these elements that need to be put in perspective here. It's a two-sided sword here, because on the one side, obviously, we make it even more complicated in a nascent industry. On the other side, imagine the headlines 4 years down the line from today. Germany, HINCO would be procure, for example, from India. And with that project, there's a land grabbing issue coming up, or water sustainability issue coming up. That would be a devastating signal to the markets. There will be a huge debate in Europe. It doesn't make sense to produce and import hydrogen from emerging economies or anywhere outside the world. You don't want to have this debate. Even if this might be the sneak and leaner way at the moment, I think we have to take the full Monty here, take that hurdle as well, really ensure that environmental, social standards are being really kept at very high standards, because otherwise you're running the risk that we bring in sort of importing or exporting from India's point of view in miscredit, which could really destroy the entire export market.
Sonja, in all of the issues and topics we're just discussing, how do you find the right balance, right? How much restrictions, how much can you quantify in these discussions? And how do you find the right balance between having something that's successful and practical against something that is,
You mean on social issues?
Yes, on social issues.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I think personally it will depend on the specific situation. So I'm really happy, Timo, that you have the same view. Yes, the more parameters you need to consider and where you need to prove, yes, we are doing things right, the more complex it becomes. And you may also run the risk of killing some good projects, which might have a great environmental positive impact in terms of CO2 reductions. But unfortunately, you have land conflicts or whatever. So I think it really needs to be balanced out. So in my personal view, I think there should be some fundamental safeguards, so to speak, some red lines that one shouldn't pass. Mm-hmm. And then it depends a bit on the specific project, whether what could, let's say, close one eye because maybe not 100% scoring is given on this or that parameter. But yeah, it's a really sensitive issue. And since we're talking about that, maybe I can give a little anecdote from former CDM times. So that's also carbon markets. And I remember that we have been engaged in a project that was about wastewater treatment. And we went through a whole accreditation. And at the end of the day, there was a press release from the local community that a civil right fighter has been killed because of land conflicts. And of course, that killed the whole project. And it was really a shock to everyone involved. So even a seemingly nice project can have really serious impacts. And so they shouldn't be underestimated.
Sam, I know in the green hydrogen standard, there was all of these areas where you wanted early stage consultation with the community, right? Why was that there? And do you think now we of course know it's very important. Now, do you think it's important more than ever that everybody looks at these ways of consulting with the community before the project?
Yeah. So when we develop, and you can Google it, green hydrogen standard, and you'll see a photo of me waving in Google. So we have developed, and we've tried to, it's a global level where we look at emissions, we look at the ESG performance of these projects, and we look at their impact on the communities that are hosting these projects. And I want to touch on the G in ESG. Everyone forgets about the G. We're already seeing around the world corruption allegations associated with green hydrogen projects. We're seeing a lack of transparency, a lack of accountability. And so that's why in the work that we're doing, the requirements that we have, one of the general principles that we developed together with stakeholders, including Sonja and others, is that all of our requirements, they emphasize community consultation, that there has to be transparency and accountability here. And that for two reasons. One, it's the right thing to do, first and foremost. Secondly, if you think you're going to get a project through, just look at the experience with renewable development around the world. Actually, I live in the far north of Norway. It's the least densely populated part of Europe. It has some of the best wind power potential on the planet. And in my little community, there are 7 large wind power projects, and they've been planned for about the last 7 years. Do you know what has happened in the last 7 years? Nothing. Why? Because there's huge opposition, even though it's very sparsely populated. There's opposition from indigenous communities. There's opposition from landowners. There's opposition from the fisheries industry because of the impact that these projects are going to have. If it's not possible to get these projects happening where there's no people almost, think about how difficult it's going to be to get it done where you've got, hundreds of millions of people. There's going to be extraordinary pressure on looking at the social, environmental, negative impacts, but also asking, what is the community going to get out of these projects? Is there going to be employment opportunities? Can we look at things like, can we overbuild water treatment so there's access to clean water? Can we look at some of the hydrogen, not just for export, but channeling that into, as Sonja's working on, into cheaper fertilizers? Then you can start to build up the social license to operate for these projects. So that's something that, as Timo said, if we don't get this right, the customer's not going to accept this product. They won't want to be associated with a product that has human rights abuses in the value chain. Your customers will disappear, your bankers will disappear, your investors will disappear, and this project, which looks really good on paper, will go nowhere. So it's the right thing to do morally, but it's an economic necessity if you want to get a project off the drawing board and actually happening on the ground.
Would it be still green if it's coming on a land which is a green land, fertile agricultural land?
So I'm always a bit sort of reluctant. We've been doing pre-feasibility work with projects all around the world, and we usually have to sign, I just talked about transparency, but we usually have to sign a non-disclosure agreement because project developers, they don't want to go public until they've got everything organized. Because if they go public with the project, it'll sort of get blown up straight away until they've started to address these issues. So we sign NDAs. But so many of the projects that we're looking at, the issue that comes up time and time again is water. Where's the water going to come from? And often these projects are in environmentally sensitive areas or where there's already existing agriculture and you're potentially pushing people off their land. So yes, we need projects where there's the best solar potential and the best wind potential, but we also need to look at those issues of strategic land use planning. And there should be, there certainly are in Norway and other places, there are no-go areas. We say we're not going to be doing these projects in national parks. We're not going to be doing these projects in areas of high agricultural value. We're going to look at this strategically, and we're going to, the previous session in the other room was looking at hydrogen clusters. Because hydrogen is very difficult to transport, you need to make sure that you're building up this industry close to the renewables and close to the users. So you start to build up these hydrogen hubs. So it has to be done at the project level, but it also needs to be assessed strategically. And there will be areas where we decide, even though there's great potential here, it's the right thing not to move hydrogen into those areas.
No, we will touch back on this a little bit deeper, in the Q&A session. But Sonja, if you want to add to what Sam was saying, please.
Yeah, thanks. Sam, I just wanted to add on your nice description of the land conflicts, even in Norway. And I think that's happening everywhere, right? I just want to kind of bring in a bit more of a hopeful or optimistic point of view, because there's now, new developments going on and new trends of combining, for example, PV stations with agriculture. So there's a lot of drive behind agri-PV projects. We're also engaged in Colombia in a couple of projects. And that gives an opportunity to not see it as a conflict, but really also see the benefits that could occur from, increased revenues for the local communities, maybe some electricity access in remote areas. So I think if one designs it smartly, it doesn't necessarily have to be a conflict.
It's clear that we need to engage with the communities from the early stages of the project. We need to ensure that communities are benefited, and we need to ensure that these communities are not hurt. There's proper land and water use assessments, etc. Now, this is a little contentious. I know several standards and certifications across the world haven't, really looked deep into this, right? And when you start talking about it, you come into a myriad of challenges. Even when we had these discussions before the session, we only spoke about all of these issues we're discussing at this moment. But, Mr. Bakre, I want you to come to this in two perspectives, as personally and as an organization, right? Personally, we all have certain opinions and ideas, but as an organization, we can only implement certain, we're limited by our mandates and, what's possible. So if you can give us your personal views first, and, as MNRE, what do you think MNRE is doing to address some of the issues we're discussing?
See, let's break this complete or complex issue into simple parts. Where is the question? So there are two basic areas. First thing is that, and this is, if I say the personal issue. So where we are going to have challenges, one is the location or the land where we are developing a solar park or a wind park. As you rightly said, there are always possibility where we set up some wind turbines because there is a huge potential, and there is a possibility of community or the local area people getting into trouble or some discomfort, some kind of. Same is the case of solar, because if it is using some kind of land which is perhaps used for some other purpose. The second thing is the production side. So I'm presuming taking the extreme step where the solar is produced at one place. So there are challenges at that place because of solar or wind. And there are different challenges where the hydrogen is produced or the green hydrogen produced because of the water, etc. And if you pick up from Honorable PM's speech in the morning, he said, why can't we use actually the wastewater or the saline water from the seawater? We can use it, and without putting burden on the fresh water or the drinking water, which is otherwise currently available to the community, and taking that particular share and converting that into hydrogen. So this is the challenge. But from the government perspective, the framework which has been there, and as I again go back to Article 6.2, this includes SDEF. If you have noted the MOEF website, the Sustainable Development Evaluation Framework. So that frameworks talk about, so if whenever there is a GHG mitigation project, and it has to be project to project wise. So any voluntary carbon credit project, etc. So every project has to disclose the information regarding the social and all other kinds of impact. At the same time, there is always a mechanism which perhaps used in most of the countries, that these projects before awarded or before getting registered, the information is kept on the website or it is published, so that the local community there or any group or any people who are getting affected can submit their representation to the authority, and in this case, the Environment Ministry, MNRE, to actually that giving a reason or otherwise, if there is a representation or there is opposition or there are certain hindrances which is coming into their way through this project. So as rightly said, it has to be dealt at the project to project level. So I believe the policies, but again, as I said, this is only the beginning. Maybe after 1 year, 2 years, we may get more inputs. We may start getting more representation, and there is always possibility that the the scheme or the policy or the strategy will get further updated or revised or be made more practical in terms of these issues. Thank you.
To add to that, also experiences, from these projects that will determine. Rupesh, if you want to come
I
in,
just
please.
want to add something what Mr. Bakre mentioned. I mean, the good part of our standard, wherein we have not restricted the hydrogen plant to get directly connected with the RE plant. We can feed in the grid and then evacuate energy from the grid. And then of course, which will be the renewable energy. So this actually distributes the risk of social hindrance at one single location. So wherein in RFNBO, the renewable energy plants must be directly connected with the electrolyzer plant. So that is gone. We are also allowing the energy to be purchased from the power exchange through GTAM market. We are also allowing, in Indian standard, we are allowing.
Okay, thanks for clarifying. I was just
yeah.
like, that's still TUV or is it India?
In Indian standard, we are also allowing, purchase of power from a third party through power purchase agreement. So I mean, so the geographical issues which are there with respect to considering India as single bidding zone, which is not right now restricting most of the producers while signing the offtake agreements with the off-takers, especially in Europe. I mean, that is not in our standard, at least for domestic consumption.
Yeah, thanks, Rupesh. I think I want to bring in Pulak. Well, as an assurance provider and auditor, right? Where or how would you play a role in enabling that? In this whole ESG conversation, that you are influencing these projects and ensuring that these are also meeting all these requirements and they're being fair to people around them and the environment.
So let's understand the point that I think all hydrogen projects, while the carbon intensity is a very strong pillar, which actually kind of dictates the green credential. But what we possibly also have to understand that some of these projects, or possibly many of these projects, are actually built with an offtake outside India. So I think we heard the minister talk about it in the morning, that the Indian hydrogen ecosystem does build on an export market, which is going to be a predominantly large model with which the ecosystem is going to survive and grow. So in a way, if you see very carefully, what is the offtake market really kind of dictating? Okay, so while the threshold from that perspective, the Indian scheme has done quite well, set up a very right threshold, a very good framework, a very rigorous mechanism. I think there are two other pillars that we see from Bureau Veritas, which possibly, if not now, maybe in the course of evolution, they should stand to have equal importance. And as I said, we believe the entire verification and certification of a hydrogen project should stand on three pillars as such. Okay, so carbon intensity for sure is definitely one. Sustainability is as well an equally important pillar, because we do not want that the projects, after they get built and then when they are actually ready for offtake, there are concerns on sustainability which kind of limits the offtake from that project. And the challenge is such kind of news about many Indian projects could actually have a larger impact on the Indian hydrogen ecosystem. It's just not one project. It can kind of start to have impact on the overall hydrogen ecosystem for India. But besides sustainability, if you ask me, I personally believe the third pillar to me is more important and more critical from an Indian perspective, which is the safety aspect. So as we all know, the molecule is notorious. Okay, it has chances of much more larger safety incidents if the safety doesn't stand to be well considered right at the design stage. So this is not something, we have had many discussions with developers where they believe this is something that they would like to have assessments done post the projects are ready. But there are many safety elements, many safety studies that are actually to be considered right at design stage. Because after the project is built, there is very little room that you can really do to change things. And just like many oil and gas projects, the design phase does consider very large safety considerations in designs. I think those considerations should be brought inside hydrogen projects, and they should actually be reviewed very critically on how does the safety aspect stand. Just imagine one incident kind of really shakes the entire ecosystem. Okay, and this is not what we would like to hear in India. So I personally think And that's what even the Bureau Veritas scheme that we have on a voluntary scheme that kind of bases on 3. And all 3 of them do have a verification at design stage. This is not something that we decide to do only post the project gets commissioned. Though at the design stage, the verifications may be smaller in scope, but at least it brings in elements in design for verification for sustainability aspects and also verification for certain critical safety ones, the HAZOP, hazards, and the QRS. So there are many things that can actually be done at design stage, which ensures by the time the project gets built and it's ready, it stands on all the 3 pillars and will be available for a good offtake for a long duration of its life.
Thanks, Pulak.
Nisha, I was just going to add 2 technicalities, but I think they're important ones. We've been focusing on hydrogen standards, but it's also important to dive into the details. When you talk about being audited, there are auditor standards as well. The credibility of the whole system rests on trust and confidence that the auditors are following professional standards. So that's something I think that, I'm interested in looking in some more detail about how you've approached that question. It's something that we wrestle with. Anyone can write you a certificate. That's meaningless unless they're following, professional audit standards. The second point, is on hydrogen leakage. First and foremost, if you're working to produce hydrogen, you don't want to waste it. Point number 1. Point number 2, it is a health and safety issue. Point number 3, it is an emerging climate issue as well. Hydrogen is not a greenhouse gas, but it does interact with other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. It interacts with methane and a number of other molecules as well. So although it doesn't count so hydrogen leakage directly doesn't count as an emissions that need to be taken into account, there is a lot of concern. If you have 5% hydrogen leakage, then that has an indirect impact. So there's 3 good reasons to tackle hydrogen leakage: the economics, the health and safety, and climate. And we've been doing some work on that as part of the Green Hydrogen Standard. If you're interested in learning more, then get in touch.
Thanks, Sam. I think this whole conversation, it highlights how important certification is and how comprehensive, perspectives need to be when you look at, certifying these molecules. But Pulak, there's one more thing I want to bring you in for. As an assurance provider, what do you think governments and government agencies should do to ensure that, it's a level playing field for all players involved?
I think to be really fair, a rigorous framework is a prerequisite, which I think the Indian government and MNRE put together have brought in. I think, but we in the auditing business believe on one specific thing: a well-written framework is possibly a job half done. The remaining half is the person who actually goes down to site and does the verification.
Like what Sam said, it's about the accounts and the auditor.
Absolutely. So let's not go in the hydrogen certification. Even for the usual shop inspections, you can have your best SOPs written, the best QOPs written, but the inspector who goes on site is the one who really decides what he does with that. So in a way, what we have to be very careful is, while there is a lot of discussion about carbon intensity, we need to differentiate the 2 aspects. One is an organizational carbon footprint, the GHG emissions. And there is another thing, which is the product carbon footprinting, which has to do with the hydrogen certification or the ammonia certification. While they both relate to carbon footprints, the rigorousness and the complexity of the exercise is far more when you come to a product carbon footprinting than when you do an organizational footprint and talk about scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3s. So the exercise that we would have to ensure that the people who actually go down have experience of doing a product carbon footprint. Plus, I believe to some extent, the level playing field would only come if in case everybody who does the hydrogen certification from an Indian perspective are liable as an organization. Let's say as a certification body. As a certification body, I have an auditing mechanism with my certification body. So I would be reviewed for my certification process, and I have to stand up to that. And I'm accountable both for my own certificate for ensuring that we do it in the market. So I think we should ensure that there are some good certification bodies who are recognized and possibly have an accounting mechanism where they can actually be held responsible if in case the verification is not good. I think I love the example that Sam tried to do by saying your certificate is actually your Rolex watch. Because if you just take off for a moment in hydrogen, your real value is the certificate. So if the credibility of the certificate gets questioned at any point of time, it just kind of dismantles the framework.
Bakre sir made note that he has to extend the penalty clause to assurance providers as well. But we can keep going on. I'm going to stop here.
Sorry, one
Sir,
take on
please
that.
give us your name. And,
My name is Pramod. So I have one take on that. I was just hoping that people will not speak about scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 when you are talking on green hydrogen here, because if you adopt that method of product certifying scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, I don't know, then most of the installations will have a serious issue.
No, sorry, possibly you misread me.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that the hydrogen certification has to do with scope 1 and scope 2. I'm saying these are two different things.
Okay.
One is
Now,
an
because-
organizational footprint that would talk about scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. The other one, when we talk about hydrogen certification, is a product carbon footprint,
Okay.
which is different.
No, but
There are
it's-
many
it's-
different
it's-
ways of doing that.
But it's good, it's relevant. I mean, maybe we have a long way to go. When I put up a green ammonia plant, and then when I really look at the carbon footprint in terms of the capex I spent, it could be huge. So it may be a long way really to bring down all the three scope and then still make green, economical green, ammonia and hydrogen. So
that's why in this whole certification landscape, you have these system boundaries and you have all of these different silos under which, we will consider certain parameters. I know there were a lot of them in the audience who wanted to engage and ask more questions. Sir, please.
I'm Bimesh Gupta from NRL. My question is related to definition of the hydrogen, green hydrogen. Sorry?
Can you repeat that again? What of green hydrogen?
Definition of green hydrogen.
Definition, okay.
Yeah. Definition disclosed by, circulated by our ministry is already explained by the panelists that 2 kg per kg of hydrogen, 2 kg CO2 per kg of hydrogen. But if you go through the electrolyzer load, an entire utility, including DM plant, cooling water system, which is required for the green hydrogen plant, if it is same battery limit and all the power is used is green power, then there will be no CO2 emission, greenhouse emission, so-called. So where this 2 kg is giving us allowance, what for it is? Sorry?
You're saying it's lenient, it is.
Yeah, that's what my question is.
Because,
yeah.
Yes, please,
and,
you guys have some real numbers in your hands.
And the second part is that if we go through the CBG route, biomass route, biomass gasification lead to many CO2 emission. I think that is discounted due to life cycle assessment, and what is the basis? Is giving them some account for that also, this 2 kg will be there in case of the biomass route green hydrogen is produced. That is my two questions, sir.
The scheme speaks about that, but I take this opportunity to that whatever your questions, your suggestions, your inputs on the scheme, as you rightly said, these are all first have to be finalized based on the inputs of community from the stakeholders and all other policy makers. So kindly submit your views and definitely we'll take into consideration. So I think you will get all the answers there. Yeah.
Yeah, because if you go for biomass route, a lot of CO2 emission takes there, gasification. And another is CBG route.
But again, biomass is considered as a carbon. That's what. So we'll take it. Kindly give the inputs. Yeah.
And that 2 kg regarding 2 kg, this is giving us some allowance to use some gray power, normal thermal power.
No.
Or
I think let's understand how this is working. Okay, it's not that the 2 kg of CO2 equivalent has been brought out of the blue sky. There is a basis to bring this, and it doesn't differentiate pathways. I'll give you a reason on why I'm saying that. See, the way the green has been defined, while we do not love to use the word green because the green can be anything actually. But what is green really, and this is an internationally accepted definition, is that your carbon intensity of your produced molecule of hydrogen should actually bring about a 70% reduction on carbon intensity of a similar fossil fuel comparator. Those numbers are internationally accepted on what would be a fossil fuel comparator And when you back calculate the 70%, you get a threshold on where the green starts. Okay, so the 2 kg of CO2 equivalent is that back calculation of the 70% threshold, that it has to be 70% less carbon intensive than a fossil fuel comparator. So if you go back, you get a threshold. There is a boundary that India has defined for cradle to gate. Okay, had it been EU, the boundary is larger, so your thresholds go larger. But the 2 kilos of CO2 equivalent would not
boundary of battery limit out of the green hydrogen plant, or
yeah. Currently, the Indian scheme is the battery limit of the green hydrogen plant.
That is allowances for the.
You definitely get more deeper answers. Does anyone else with a different question?
I have a first observation. First of all, thank you for such an engaging session. Really appreciate that. My name is Shiromani, and I'm from Acme Cleantech. We are one of the largest IPP companies in the country, as well as developer of green hydrogen and green ammonia. I have an observation and then a question. The observation is India is a big integrated synchronous grid, which is in which the entities can freely exchange energy without capacity allocation. That is one. And second is there is no differentiated pricing as far the geography is concerned. So in this backdrop, why India is not considered as a one bidding zone? Rupesh did touch upon this aspect, but I wanted to learn more from you.
It's a great question. And I've been parts of discussions, and this is particularly relevant with the EU RFMBO certification. And most people are familiar with it, but it actually has, people talk about 3 pillars, but there's actually 4, I think, that are super important. One, it needs to be new additional capacity. One is it needs to be hourly matched. It needs to come from, it's called deliverability. It needs to come from the same bidding zone. And there's also some restrictions on state aid, which people often forget, but is super important and very relevant to projects here in India. And our colleagues there at Bureau Veritas and the Green Hydrogen Standard, we've done some early stage pre-feasibility where we look in detail at those 3 pillars. The point on the bidding zone, that a bidding zone is very, very well understood in European electricity markets. And that's where the RFMBO rules were written for the European market. And then they said the same rules will apply to imports coming into Europe. Not as an afterthought, but there are lots of concepts in the RFMBO rules like state aid and like a bidding zone that have a very specific definition and are well understood in Europe. But now if you go to Egypt or Mauritania or Namibia or India, you need to apply the same concepts. We've seen some studies saying that considering all of India as one bidding zone is acceptable. We've also seen some studies that said that it's not. You need to go and look in some detail, and the European Commission have issued some Q&As. I can share them with you if you like. There's some tests that they use, or the voluntary schemes will need to use in determining what is a bidding zone. And it has to do with congestion and pricing, differentiated pricing between different regions. Now, as you said, there is no differentiated pricing. So you need to look at those issues of the ability, essentially, to move power in time throughout the whole zone without any kind of restrictions. So that depends on, things like regional interconnectors and so forth. The last thing that makes this difficult is because the grid is not going to stay as it is now for the next 20 years. It's going to be developed. There's going to be more interconnectors. So you it's difficult to sort of pre-qualify or certify a project for 20 years. We don't know what the grid is going to look like in 20 years. It's changing, and it's going to change very quickly in some countries. So unfortunately, I can't give you a simple yes/no answer. We need to look at the characteristics of the individual project, where it's located, whether it's using its own dedicated renewables, whether it's wheeling power through the grid, whether it's using a power purchase agreement, and then look at some of those questions around bidding zones, state aid, and hourly matching. And the devil is in the detail. If you want to access the European market, then you're going to have to do that work.
Yeah, so good to see, yes, very rightly said, but the studies have been done. And finally, the recommendations have been submitted to Ministry of Power. And Ministry of Power has, after careful consideration and taking into account all the points raised in the EU RED2 and So they have actually published, and I think, in fact, they have directed the grid operator to consider this, and so take into account all the congestion, etc. But yes, you rightly said the grid will change, but the principles of further modifying the grid and or in fact augmenting the grid have been decided in such a manner that in future also this direction of single bidding zone will be applicable, and that's how the future development and the design of grid will take place. That's the decision Ministry of Power has already taken now. Recently, of course, last
Well,
week.
I think just to add on that, it makes no sense whatsoever for 100 green hydrogen projects in India to all have to answer this question about what is and what is not acceptable. So this is something that at GH2, we've actually got to establish dialogue with the Commission, and we're saying, look, can we look at a country like Egypt, like India? Can we look at some of these questions about state aid and bidding zones and actually just have one answer? Because then we wouldn't have to deal with it 100 times at the project level. And that's where we are today. Unfortunately, is that each individual developer has to go through that process. So if you're interested in these issues, this is why we exist, is to try to tackle these questions strategically and try to take that feedback back to the Commission and say, can we not have a bilateral agreement between European Commission and the government of India that establishes once and for all, whether this is aligned or not? And that will save everyone thousands of hours of running around.
But Timo, you're someone who's facing the same.
Maybe, yeah, exactly. Because I mean, we really had intense discussions exactly about that point with, players from India, from other parts of the world. And if you have a number that I can call in Brussels that gives me an answer, please give it to me, because we didn't get one. And it's really, really crucial. I mean, when we started also with H2 Global, we thought we'd try to find a compromise where the delegated acts were not even out. So we said within the vicinity of 500 kilometers. That even created political controversy between India and Germany, because there was on a government on a ministerial level, the one minister approaching our minister, you're excluding India here from your auctions. What are you doing? So also India, in a very specific case, we assume this will be seen as one bidding zone. All the hard facts are in favor of that interpretation. However, there is no formal accreditation or formal justification of that. So it's really critical at the moment. And also what we try to, we always be very pragmatic so that we're not putting hurdles here. That we always try to find contractual arrangement there in case things do not turn out the way people expected, that we can go back to the table and discuss again. But we need to start investing today, because the problem is all these critical issues here are a showstopper when you go to your banks. That's exactly the problem. So you need a backdoor where you can say, okay, we see this. We have very good arguments why we believe we're handling this. But in case there is an issue coming up, we are in the position to come back to the table and try to solve it then. Because that is very important. We need that flexibility. We can't have that rigorous approach right from the beginning.
I think you've given some very good feedback. These can be addressed by the governments themselves, right? Now, also, these discussions have been ongoing within the organization. If you go to our YouTube page, you just look for the Green Hydrogen Organization in India. We had a discussion just a few months ago with 4 developers and Sam here as well. But Sonja, you wanted to come in on this being discussed now, please.
Yeah, thanks. Just very briefly, because we're now discussing the technical details, what counts and what doesn't count. I would like to go back one step, and I think the political intention of the EU was to say, hey, clearly we want to see new renewable energies being built for producing hydrogen. And this was the political intention. And obviously then the operational questions came in, but what is, if I have grid connection in order to increase the utilization and all that stuff. But I think if you want to plan long-term and want to export to the EU, you should probably plan with dedicated new renewable energy capacity.
Thank you. I know we are out of time, but there's a lot of interest from the audience. If you have any questions, you're welcome to reach out to any of the panelists, but, I'll take some closing. Okay, Sam, I'll give the closing remarks to you because, in all fairness, you're the only one on the stage that has been doing only the standard and the certification, 24/7. You're always reading about it, talking about it. Please.
Well, I was just about to give the microphone to someone because I've been talking too much. But I'd like to close with something completely different, if I may, just to wrap this up. We have been focusing today, quite rightly, here in India, it's all about green hydrogen. And that's great. And there's interest in biomass. I'd love to talk some more about biomass. There's some really interesting issues there. But the focus is exclusively on green, and there's a green hydrogen standard in India. There's a global green hydrogen standard. What I'd like to focus on is the competition. Okay, and let's look at Japan. Japan is developing a clean hydrogen import strategy. Who are you competing with? You are competing with countries with oil and gas that are going to make blue hydrogen. So we need to be watching very carefully what is happening with blue hydrogen standards, right? And anytime someone says to you clean hydrogen, say, define what you mean. Anytime someone says low carbon hydrogen, define what you mean. Even the IEA, they write dozens of reports about this, and they put the definition in a footnote on page 278 and hope that nobody reads it. And it's not clear enough because there are loopholes and there are gaps. And if we don't attend to those loopholes and those gaps, our competitors are going to be supplying to Korea and Japan, and green hydrogen and green ammonia is still going to be too expensive. So my closing suggestion to you all is keep working hard on strict green rules, because we need that. We need to have a product that we can be proud of and that will be accepted in the global marketplace for the next 30 years, the next 50 years. But please keep an eye on the competition, because the oil and gas industry, and the coal industry produce 100 million tons of dirty hydrogen today. That's what we should call it. We should stop talking about low carbon hydrogen. We should talk about dirty hydrogen. There's a dirty hydrogen industry today, and they will not give up that market share easily. So watch what's happening in the clean hydrogen debate and keep an eye on the loopholes. Otherwise, they'll steal your Rolex and eat your lunch. That's my closing comment.
Thanks, Sam. Very, very important as well, right? Not everybody here is exporting. I know Acme is here, NTPC, I don't know if I don't see Renew, but all of these companies are facing these issues, right? And if we give any space to blue to creep in, we lose out on how the green hydrogen economy advances. But Mr. Bakre, closing remarks from you. Certifications are important, they are key.
Yeah.
What are the timelines you're looking for, for India to start implementing?
So let me thank all the panelists and in fact audience. We are still engaged for almost 1.5 years last, and for a typical focused topic on certification. So as rightly said, the G20 last year, New Delhi declaration happened just on the one level above in the morning. The summit room, if you have seen all the leaders here, they endorsed, and which was also in the Honorable PM's speech, that there has to be a global agreement on what are the principles on which we define the green hydrogen or whatever. So we need to agree among the countries, and that was also in the last year's Dubai COP. It was very well taken. So that's the first step it has to go. I'm sure this year Azerbaijan, Baku, they are going to further deliberate on that. Coming back to the India, we are already evolving a robust framework for the carbon market. And we want to leverage that market. As I think someone rightly said, unless we have a robust framework with a very experienced, trusted pool of auditors, everything is going to be hayward if we don't follow it up. So we believe that the certification scheme will definitely become a good step for all the developers to engage into contracts, off-tax, setting up their plants, getting finance in a trusted way. And not only for a couple of years, it has to be a long-term finance, long-term off-take, etc. So we believe, I think in next 1 year, perhaps next year when we assemble, we will be again at a next level where we would have agreed a much larger agreement among the countries, rightly said, between the government of India, between EU, or many other different countries, to have agreed what is the definition, what is the certification scheme, how it is to be implemented, project to project, how it is simplified. In fact, we were in the EU roundtable just now, and the opinion is that more and more we simplify, as you rightly said. Let's have a, instead of going to 500 projects, let's simple it, because everything is going to actually put a barrier on our overall objective, getting into a more renewable capacity, getting into the green premium. So it has to happen in a couple of years. The countries need to agree. India will be definitely taking effective steps, but the collaboration is important. And I believe next year when we'll meet, I think we'll be at a much different and much clearer stage, and that will help the entire ecosystem to build up faster. Thank you.
Very much, believe in what you just said. A round of applause. Hopefully next year when we have this, it's not in a side room, it's in the plenary hall, because it is such an important topic. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, certifications is not just for the engineers, for the assurance providers. It affects each one of us, and the lives that we live. So with that, thank you very much for staying until 5:45 and being engaged. My panelists, thank you very much. Each one of y'all, you've been fighting the battle, ensuring that this industry takes off in the best way possible. So a round of applause to you as well.
Had I known that it is going to be so popular, I would have definitely insisted on a larger capacity room. But next time I will definitely get a bigger room. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all our esteemed panelists, our moderators. Great session, great panelists, great moderator. Now we'll move to the felicitation. May I please request the moderator, Nishaanth, Mr. Shansar, to please join us at the center. Requesting Shri Abhay Bakre sir to please join us at the center as we move forward and felicitate Mr. Bakre. Ladies and gentlemen, can we please give a round of applause and let's take part in the moment. Thank you so much. Once again, we thank you for taking our time and joining us on this special day. It really, really means a lot to us, and it was a day full of learning. Now requesting Ms. Sonja, ma'am, to please join us at the center. Ladies and gentlemen, we are felicitating Ms. Sonja, Managing Partner, Perspective Group. And we thank you, ma'am, from the behalf of the entire team and all of us who are present here, that you came, you spent your time, and we have learned a lot from you today. Thank you so much. Thank you. Now requesting Dr. Sam, Director, Green Hydrogen Standard GS2, sir, to please join us at the center. Ladies and gentlemen, we are felicitating Dr. Sam Bartlett, Director, Green Hydrogen Standard GS2. And we have our moderator felicitating Dr. Sam. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to you. Now requesting Timo, Mr. Timo, CEO, Hint Global. Sir, to please join us at the center. We are felicitating Mr. Timo. Ladies and gentlemen, round of applause. I would request all of us. Thank you so much. Thank you. And now may I please request Mr. Pulak Prakash, Director, Sales Strategy Bureau, Veritas, sir, to please join us at the center. And a day full of learning for all of us. Wonderful. Wonderful. And I would request our moderator, sir, to please be joined at the center. Requesting Mr. Rupesh, sir, to please join us at the center. Mr. Rupesh Kumar Singh, Head Renewable TUV Rhineland. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Now requesting our moderator to please be joined at the center and requesting Shri Abhay Bakre, sir, to please take a step forward and felicitate our moderator, Mr. Nishaanth. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, can we please join our hands? Great session. Lot of learning. Now may I please invite all of us, our esteemed panelists, to please join us at the center. And let's join us for a group photo and a wonderful session, beautiful day. So much to learn, so much to take away for all of us. Each one of us have got great learning today. Thank you. Thank you so much once again. Thank you so much to our esteemed attendees. Your presence, your questions have helped us a lot to get more insight on the topic. And we thank all of you once again for showing such great engagement. It really, really means a lot to us. Thank you so much. Thank you.